Welcome back today, everybody. We have an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, what it is generally, but specifically how it actually applies to you and your journey with hair systems. This is one of the topics that people keep coming back to on this channel and seem to have along their journey. So today we have Scotty with us. Scotty, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people who you are briefly, and let's jump into the conversation.
Sure. I'm Scotty Clock. I'm a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice in New Orleans. I've been doing this for about 17 years and so happy to be here with you today, Jake.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. So I thought that you would be the perfect person to dive a little bit deeper into what imposter syndrome is and how it affects people's journey, specifically with hair systems. And we'll just digress from there. So let's get going on it. What exactly is this thing called imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome, we can all have to some extent. We call it imposter syndrome when it's significantly affecting our lives. And it's when we feel like we're essentially a fraud or we are unworthy in some way. And, and when that really significantly affects our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do we see imposter syndrome generally pop up in people's lives? But before we begin, this video is sponsored by Livid Hair. Livid Hair makes a great product, and you can get 15% off any stock order by using my code Jake15, which you'll find down below.
Really, it can be anywhere. It can be in work. It can be in relationships. I think the tie-in is more, what does it have to do with the personality? Who is developing imposter syndrome? People who are more likely to experience heightened anxiety. People who feel like they have to achieve in order to be worthy of love. Are more likely to have imposter syndrome. Within my practice, I've experienced it a couple of times. And often it's been around people who are struggling with depression, but want to be in relationships. And they feel like an imposter when they're putting their best foot forward when trying to make a good impression and meet new people that they might have some kind of romantic interest in, and they feel like that person doesn't know this darker side of them, that they struggle with depression and they're not happy and smiling all the time.
So it sounds like it can be found in those with less self-esteem,
Absolutely.
those that are depressed, those that are trying to achieve a lot, those that are trying to maybe better their own lives. And they're taking that journey and walking the path. So this is an interesting thing. I think a lot of people, in my experience, think about imposter syndrome when it comes primarily to their work first and foremost, where they get the job they feel like they don't deserve, or they're surrounded by people that they think are way smarter than them.
Right.
Which some of the people watching this channel, you may have heard of this. You may also have not have, and that's okay as well. I have a question kind of pertaining to that is, do you find that those that are actually dealing with imposter syndrome and they're experiencing it have an active knowledge that they are experiencing it? Do they have that awareness?
Yes, absolutely. Because they'll say it to me. They'll say it to me, absolutely. And then so we look at that and we process it and we talk about, the way in which you're looking at this, what part of this is irrational and how can we turn this around? That's a big part of what I do. I do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy with people who are struggling with imposter syndrome.
So could you describe what that looks like? Cognitive therapy first, just explain that in
absolutely.
5 to 10 seconds and how that would apply.
Therapy it's trying to get this. I do it like this. It's getting this and this to connect. And a lot of the time we feel badly because of the things that we tell ourselves. And, there can be a lot of negative self-talk. And our brains usually just don't shut off. And particularly people who are self-conscious, who are perfectionists, people who struggle with anxiety, the wheels are always turning and it's usually something negative. And so a lot of times I'll have people write down these thoughts as they're coming to them and really look at them and write a new thought. Try to flip that on its head, turn it around. How can you change what you're telling yourself? And it takes a lot of practice. I mean, by the time that we're recognizing that we have imposter syndrome, the fact that we're doing this is probably as natural to us as blinking.
Mm.
So it takes a long time and consistency to undo. It's a process, not an event.
100%. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really great way to frame it for those of us that, one, are aware that we may be dealing with it in a particular area of life, but two, be just exploring this and saying like, wait, this is actually something I'm dealing with, because it isn't a switch that you can just like flip on or off, right? It's a journey of self-acceptance and probably reframing thoughts, patterns, and also the way one looks at themselves, being deserving of love and appreciation and support and all of those things. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm not the therapist here, but just using what my knowledge of it is here. And yeah, so that brings me to an interesting question. Let's kind of swing back around to how this specifically applies to those that are wearing hair systems, have hair loss, and that whole issue. So why don't you start us off, like frame why someone would very easily be experiencing imposter syndrome with
Well,
a
and
hair system?
I think the reason that I had maybe suggested this one as our first topic or something to try out is because in watching your videos, I think you had talked about it maybe a year ago
Mm.
on some level. And, certainly someone, if we're wearing a hair system, we may feel that way because it's like false advertisement, or we'll think it's false advertisement because we go on a date and think, well, this person doesn't know that the hair on my head isn't growing out of my scalp.
Mm.
And we worry that that'll somehow be a deal breaker for them, or they'll think less of us, or that other people, people at work or whomever it might be. I think it tends to hit us the hardest when it comes to potential romantic interests.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I just want to make a distinguishing point, because I think this is maybe different subject matter and also fodder for potential future video, that obsession and over the front hairline is maybe a little bit different than feeling like we're going to be found out, or that we're somehow a fake or a fraud. And I think that first one is definitely an interesting conversation, but maybe the feelings of self-esteem, low self-esteem, even with feeling better about the way you look, but still feeling like you're going to be found out, or like you're a fake or a fraud, is a very real issue that I think a lot of people face. And I have experienced that on my journey. And I see a lot of people ask questions about how I deal with that element of the journey. How do I go about processing this new persona, if you will, that people are seeing and that I'm like allowing myself to be, right? Do you have any thoughts on how someone can reframe those questions?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked me that, because that's where I wanted to go. And in doing that, I kind of like to share what my feelings were and my thoughts were. When I started wearing a hair system back in 2001, when I graduated from college. So between, undergrad and grad school. And the way I look at it, and I would suggest people to look at it, is that, we didn't choose to lose our hair. That's a choice that we did not have. And sometimes when those kinds of things happen to us, It's like what's happening to us on the outside really isn't reflecting how we feel or who we are on the inside.
Mm.
When I got a hair system and I looked at myself in the mirror, it was like, no, this is me again. And, it's not like on television or in comedies. And I think that can perpetuate this ridiculous stereotype where someone can just go and snatch your hair system right off of your head or it blows away in the wind or something like that. It's fused to our scalps for a month at a time, possibly. And, no one ever has to. They can't, if we choose to, but no one has to see us without it. This is what we're showing to people. This is what we're presenting. And that's fine. And people do this all the time in various ways. When people, you know, most of the time it's usually women are wearing makeup, they're presenting in one way. If you have breast implants, someone could say, oh, it's quote unquote false advertising. That's their perception, that's their opinion. Don't let it matter to you so much.
Hmm.
Those are not your peeps.
So it sounds to me, just to reiterate, that the first step in this is kind of accepting that we don't have control over everything in life.
Sure.
Number one being, and then once we realize that, we get to choose our future, which in this case, if you're wearing a hair system, you've chosen to embrace a new identity, and realize that third, we get to decide how we feel about that, and that other people's opinions are less important, and perhaps not important whatsoever, depending on who they are and what we think about them. We give them that power, though, and choosing to embrace that new identity. And I don't think you necessarily mentioned this, but I think it's okay, as men, as people, as humanity is concerned, that identity is it's transient, and it's something that gets to be shaped, reshaped, changed over and over and over throughout our lives. We may have once been a high school star athlete, and now we may be a parent. We may be we may have once in our life been obese, and now we may be in the best shape of our lives. Those identities that make up our overall personality and definition of who we choose to be is ever changing and always changing, right?
We have to be open to always learning and growing and changing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you could look at it and say, if you're not changing, you're dying, right?
Or you are simply stagnant. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's okay to change. It's okay to also, I think it's important for people to know that it's okay to have these struggles like imposter syndrome as you do change, because that is, in my opinion, as an unprofessional opinion, that's a sign of growth. Having to go into territory, mindsets, and deal with things that you never dealt with before, and get comfortable with being uncomfortable temporarily.
Growth definitely requires a little bit of discomfort. And that's, what counseling is about for sure. So absolutely. I think the only other thing I want to say while we're on this topic, because it's something from time to time I'll hear. And I think it's, I'm sorry, important to emphasize. Sometimes people will say they feel like an imposter when they say, well, I act differently with a romantic interest than I would with my parents, than I would with coworkers or a boss. And that's not being an imposter. We all have, hopefully we are all multifaceted, have different sides of ourselves. And it's what are we bringing out at this time, at the most appropriate time? Now some people don't have as strong a sense of self, and they don't, they're not able to necessarily recognize a core. So they just sort of, become chameleons and will sort of morph into whatever group they're in. But most of us should be able to differentiate, when it's time, recognize when it's time to put on a particular hat. So, what do you like as a parent? What do you like as a partner? What do you like, um, as an employee, whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I
Yeah. I'm
think that,
sorry if I digressed in any way there. I just thought, under imposter syndrome, I thought it was an important facet to mention.
no, I don't think that's a digression. I think it's an important part of personality and in relationship with, imposter syndrome and hair systems. It's okay to be different around different people
Yeah.
and to be more or less comfortable around certain people. Those are all okay things to feel. And I think as one gets grounded more in themselves, they get more comfortable with those different shades and hues of their personality coming out
Yeah.
with different people. And actively, we all get to make the choice of who we spend the time around with, or who we spend our time with, and who we want to be. And matching those two things up, not spending time with people that are bringing out the worst in us, spending time with people that are bringing out what we perceive as the best in ourselves.
Definitely. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that's definitely important, and that's another conversation as well. So thank you so much for coming on here and spending part of your day talking with us about something that's really important to this community and helping all of us get a little bit more awareness. Number one, about some of the feelings, emotions, states of mind that we might be experiencing, and helping us move through that with some really tangible, actionable steps. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you on this channel as we talk about more topics, and can't wait for that. So everyone, please leave a little love down in the comments for Scotty and what he's doing for us, and we will all see you soon.